Welcome, everyone. This is episode 10 of A Descent into the Tarot, The Fool's Journey. It will be, certainly, at least in regards to the Major Arcana, the last episode of this series. Last episode we ended with the sun, so we talked about the moon and the sun. And of course, the next two cards, the last two of the Major Arcana, are Judgement and The World. So, first of all, let me welcome Silas.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. So, Silas, the Judgment, another iconic card, for some scary, for some otherwise, but what is your symbolic reading on it?
Well, the Judgment card is probably one of the most important cards, bar the World Tarot card. We see this recurring angelic figure with the sort of Martian red wings, and we've touched upon it before in terms of the Temperance card, and arguably as well, I think even crops up in the Lover card as well, if I recall. So what we see there within the Judgment card is this blasting of the horn. Now that's something that is found within mythology, throughout pretty much every mythology, or at least every Indo-European or Indo-Aryan mythology, this idea of the sounding of Armageddon. For example, in the Norse mythology, you have the sounding of Ragnarok, or the War of the Gods, the Twilight of the Gods, by Heimdall, yes. It of course appears in Revelation, the sounding of the trumpets. So it's essentially I believe it is referring to in a sort of metaphorical way is this idea of the Logos, is this idea of once systems elongate in progress enough or long enough, they tend to go through a sort of a clutter, a frequency-based clutter, and it essentially buries the natural structural basis of, you could call it the cosmos or the natural order or whatever it may be, or even in terms of the blueprint itself. So to almost reinstate that structural basis, that structural memory, it has to utilize frequency, which itself is destructive. So it uses destruction almost like Shiva. It uses destruction to actually preserve the blueprints, to preserve the structural integrity of the system and the structural, and to reinstate that structural memory. So I think that's what it's probably relating to. Something interesting as well is that the Judgment horn, I guess, or trumpet, is very much akin to, again, that vertical spiral, that tower. And I don't think that's by accident. That sort of vertical toroidal structure, which itself is similar to the structure of the cosmos. We see the white and the red again, which is of course the menstrual blood and the semen, which are related to fertility, fecundity, and the preservation again of that structural memory and of the structural integrity. You also see as well, right at the bottom, that the mountains, the snow-capped mountains that we see right at the start of the Fool card, also make a return. And you'll notice right to the extreme right, beginning with the blonde-haired grey woman, or grey-skinned woman rather, we see actually there's a sort of distinction between these snow-capped mountains and the more spring-like dales and rolling hills, right, that are not touched by that tundric wilderness. So
but in fact, let me just interject here. In fact, it seems that those would be perhaps the same mountains, at least they have the same look as the mountain where the hermit previously stood to contemplate. Doesn't it look like that, or am I seeing...
No, it does. It does look like that as well. Yes, yes, absolutely. So it's this idea of material stasis as well. That when we fall, we involute temporarily. It's it's a stasis of the spirit, and the system itself, the order itself, is actually something that's not necessarily inbuilt to the, well, it's not indigenous to the system. The indigenous force of the system is that of chaos, it's that of change, and of course one can only better themselves within such a system by actually not engaging in stasis, not engaging in order, but engaging in their own self-judgment. And by judgment, we mean this sort of destruction, begetting, renewal, integrating the shadows, forcing oneself to discard the pride and to introspect. Again, similar to Plato's cave. I mean, there's a whole host of metaphors in that sort of vein. So yeah, you also see the reflection as well. So they're stepping out of the tombs, which is the sepulchre of the soul. And you'll notice with the way that the three, well, the sort of family of tombs, right? The man to the left, or the husband, that of the child, and that of the female. You'll notice it creates the 101 almost. In a sort of cubic form. That itself relates to metaphysical ideas found in Kabbalah, right? The +1 -1 equals, of course, the Ein state, or the nothingness, right? The not necessarily nothingness, but the spatial potential, where from obviously the male and the female, the dualism is born.
Yes.
So it's similar, as of course, as well to Osiris, Isis, and then of course Horus. So Horus is this almost Dionysian, Bacchic principle of this perpetuation of the structural memory that, right, similar to the Ouroboros, it itself may it has a form, but its form is only brought forth by the formlessness that chaos provides. So it's again the structural memory, and the revivification of that. You also see the reflection as well of these two. The idea regarding that is the notion that we ourselves are mirrors, that the universe is essentially just the workings of the soul. And this is why, of course, astrotheology is so, it literally forms the basis of most religions. In fact, it forms the basis of most philosophies as well, if you were to really vivisect all of these various schools of thought. I notice as well that the female, she is holding out her hands, so she's the one that actually receives she receives the frequency, if you will. And I think that is very poignant, because we find, again, this is just typically, right, and this isn't necessarily, I'm not referring to females or males individually, but the idea of the energetic essence of the feminine and the masculine. And we notice that the feminine, right at the end of late stage civilizations, tends to take on I guess you could call it a toxic or inverted form, right? This is where you get the idea of the den mother and the longhouse, where security and safety take precedent over freedom and this more unbridled nature. Jump in.
Well, consistently in the cards, in the Major Arcana that we've analyzed throughout this series, the female has been always consistently the one that looks up, while the male looks at the woman. In this particular case, the man is also looking up, but she is taller nonetheless, in the picture, at least in the drawing. So it remains consistent with the other cards where a male and a female would appear, and she is always the one that is looking up or looking towards what is actually occurring, it would seem. So it seems that it could be that here too, in your opinion.
I agree. Yeah. Well, this is the idea as well, is that the feminine is the cornerstone of life, and it's, of course, by extension, it's the cornerstone of the social organisms that we form as well. So though that in the beginning of civilizations, the toxically masculine and I mean that quite directly. That he conquers other tribes. He tames the land. He's got this sort of domineering spirit, and that itself becomes less and less. It's a bit like, well, it's actually how men are, I guess, in both life, the sexual act as well. They tend to be, quite, there's a sort of energetic furor with them, right? They will quickly expend their energy, should we say?
Now, please don't go into your sexual life.
No, just in general society as well. Men tend to not be as they don't ration their energy quite as well as women, right? That's what I'll say. They expend themselves very quickly.
Sorry, that was just a joke. But okay, so as you refer in the beginning of your analysis of this card, I think you were referring to a judgment that is a scripted one, in the sense that it mimics the organic judgment, but is not the organic one. And I think that the card attempts, at least, in my opinion, to portray that which would be the organic judgment. And of course, judgment is a word, but let me try to clarify a bit more. We see this angelic figure, like you said, with red wings, which would be, we could say rubedo wings, so a completely accomplished wings. Wings that, if you were to see it from an alchemical standpoint, which requires transformation, it would be the final stage, the goal, right, to obtain. However, I think that this rubedo state was there pre-existing already. So I would see this angelic figure as the essence, as the actual essential self. And we also see in this figure that it's holding a French. It seems to me to be a French horn, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but these horns were mostly used. Yes, they could be used for compositions, musical compositions as well, but mostly they were used to herald the arrival of a king. So to announce that, the king is approaching, so everyone get ready. And if that is the case, this is of course linked with a very well-known a story about the return of Christ, right? And when Christ returns, the judgment will occur. And if we, like I have stated previously, from my perspective merely, if Christ represents this inner king, this authority, this ego, as I put it, then his return, which could happen earlier, of course, but this return is, okay, if you haven't paid attention to your inner king, to your inner Christ, to your inner authority up until now, at this point organically you will be forced to. And what that causes is, okay, it arrives and everything that was dead in you, in the sense of being rejected, of being put into a sort of coffin, right, where it was contained, a sort of catacombs of the psyche, will emerge again to be judged. And here the judgment that is done by this king, this metaphorical internal psychological Christ, is to, ascertain if this, for example, this particular trauma, where it came from, can it be resolved? This particular mental character, was it suitable, was it not, etc. And so this basically does a sorting out, like a sort of, we could call it a spring cleaning of sorts, into the catacombs of the psyche, done by this return, even you could put it forced return, if you haven't paid attention before, of the inner authority. This is, of course, even more so because in this drawing we also see in the background equivalent three people, but they're on boats in a river, which I would suppose would represent the river Styx, in the sense here of an internal psychological river Styx of being, they didn't go through to the other side, they didn't actually arrive at the death point, at the point where the dead rest in the underworld, let's say, of the psyche, but they were still lingering on sort of in between, right? So all of this will come to the fore, and the trumpet, the horn that is played, because I see it more as, it looks to me like a French horn, although it has the flag that would later be associated with England, but I think that it announces that, okay, guys, it's time for everyone to come back to the fore, come back to the front of the mind, to the front stage, like I would call it, and let's sort it out. Let's see who you are, what you've contributed and not to this psyche, and sort of put you in the right place. Those that have a healthy place will be put there. Those that are completely artificial, such as false memories and so on, will be dissolved and completely removed from the psyche. So this to me then, of course, knowing that, if you know that there will be times of this happening organically, of course, like we've discussed before in other conversations, if you are maintaining a structure where you want the power to remain with you, you are going to mimic this. You are going to try to direct what would otherwise be an organic power into shorter cycles, where you basically stage play a sort of judgment externally to sort of vent a little bit of that energy. Like we've said before, it won't resolve the issue because you can just pretend so often, but there will come a time when the organic is inevitable. So that's the way I see it so far.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. Another thing to mention, and you quite rightly stated that the French horn was used to herald the return of the king, or to herald the king and his coming. So it's again, it's similar to what you see on the Leontocephaline, the lion-headed hierophant. The reason the head is the lion, or of course Leo Regulus as well, is because it symbolizes the sun. Similar, of course, to the blonde hair that we see through all of these cards. That is also symbolizing the sun. And what is the sun but the soul, the SOL in Latin? Or of course, that's the same. It's a homophone of SOUL in English, right? So the soul. Another thing to mention as well, and you brought it up, that it destroys things that are essentially dead. I don't know if you're familiar with the I guess it's quite an obscure film. I think it's from the late 80s or 90s, called Jacob's Ladder.
Oh yes.
And yeah, really brilliant movie. And it states in that by the way, this is a sort of elaborated paraphrasing that I've put just to make my point, but Jacob, I think it's probably near the end of the movie where it's either his psychiatrist or his doctor mentions this, that quote,
chiropractor,
yes. Exactly. Quote, if you're frightened of dying, then you will see devils and abominable visions tearing your life apart. However, if you have made peace with that paleness of death, then you will actually understand that these would-be demons were merely angels, as we see, messengers that were attempting to free you from the earth. And of course, this is similar to Mark Twain's Mysterious Stranger. This is why we see the clouds, the obfuscating, obscuring smoke or clouds that encompass that of the angel, the judgment card. By the way, Yahweh is actually depicted similarly. Funnily enough, so is the Son of Man. He's depicted as almost like a Sol Niger, a black sun. This incomprehensible, you would think incompatible imagery of the radiance of a sun, but yet His hiding place is the canopy of darkness, that he is enshrouded in this black smoke. But what it's conveying is this strangeness that we find within the character of the mysterious stranger. And I think Mark Twain understood this quality of strangeness being inherent, not just to chaos, but to the cosmic order itself. And it's like what you're saying, anything that's dead, come this judgment. I mean, even the idea of judgment itself, it derives from the Latin jus, literally law, and dicere, to say. So literally, judgment is to say the law, which is exactly what we're seeing in this illustration, right? So he's sounding the law. What is the law? Land, air, water is the sort of fundamental triune or triplicity that holds up the cosmos itself, which is of course also seen within the LAW, right, of the Trinity below, of the Father, the Mother, and of course the child, right, the Filius Philosophorum. This could also be seen as consciousness, which is of course in this depiction the female. She has the blonde hair because she receives the soul, the light of the sun, directly. She almost becomes a lamp, right? A lamp is a simulacra, a poor substitution, a poor reflection, if you will, of the sun. The sun is this blinding light. It is the source of all light, as opposed to, of course, just a lamp, which would be a source of a localized, I guess you would say, substitution or reflection of that light. And then, of course, you have the husband, and then you have that of the child, which is the synthesis. It's the idea of the self-preservation of the system, that you have compressed complexity into a sort of biological substrate of the offspring, and it's perpetuating generationally. Something else to mention as well is that, like the lover card, the male gaze always appears to be, you know, in the lover card it's on the woman, of course. I mean, no surprise there, but in this card it's like he's just looking up, a bit like the Fool, right? And her head is more, it's angled at the proper place. The male gaze is not angled up at it's like he can't see the forest for the trees. He can't see past the strangeness of the smoke. The divine eludes him, but the female understands it fully. Thus, she can more accurately put out her hands to receive that light directly. And funnily enough, so can the offspring. But the light he desires is not that the sort of light above, or the frequency from above. It is the frequency from below, the currents, the sort of river-like landscape that we see. You know, the currents of action, the material or microcosmic reflection of the macrocosmic frequency.
Yeah, to me, I mean, the way and the color, the way it is depicted and the color, although it could be argued that it is supposed to represent some gray land or whatever, I see a river. And, you know, intuitively, when I look, I see a river, and I see, you know, the other three in the background emerging from these boat coffins, a bit, of course, you know, like the Norse would honorably send their dead into barges that then would be set alight. But in this case, it is as if, you know, their coffins are floating or were floating in the Styx, right? Because that is the river, or, you know, Eridanus, or whichever other name you want to give it, but floating in the river of in between. They weren't dissolved, and they weren't at rest entirely, but perhaps this would be equivalent to, you know, awaiting the judgment itself that occurs in this card, right? Which is actually the mythological function of the underworld, as far as I can tell, right?
And something else to add to that is even this symbolism, the overarching symbolism of the river, is it's really related. Of course, it's related to Orion, thus man, but the river itself is symbolic of man, even absent Orion, and because the river itself it's a vein. It is a branch from the, I guess you could call it the root wellspring, or sea, and the salty sea again the sort of corrosive, chaotic. I guess you could call it the wellspring, origin point. That is the headwaters, if you will. That is of salt. It's of chaos. The fresh water, the rivers are always fresh water, and the commingling of the two. You see this throughout all creation myths. Establishes the world, establishes the offspring, which is the synthesis of the thesis and antithesis. But it's interesting because the river itself is essentially man. Man is this sort of, again, temporary stasis model of the grander macrocosm, which itself is of the salt sea. It is the wellspring, it is the pure potential, which is in constant, chaotic, adaptive. It's in a constant chaotic adaptive state. Something else to mention as well is that you find, taking this back to sort of society and civilization, it's this notion that, so for example, they have these almost grey, emaciated complexions, and that, and again, they're emerging from the sepulchre of their own soul, right? Or, as you stated, almost like these boats, the ferries, they're on the river Styx. And again, it's like they're being saved from their own ignorance, right? And it seems to me that throughout civilizations themselves appear to be like mounds of the dead. Again, they're all cities are after each destruction, each sack, each population exodus or displacement. These cities become ruinous, and then what ends up happening is, I don't know why humans do this, but they tend to just simply build upon the ruins of the old. And what ends up happening is they build up and up and up, generation after generation, and you start to get these mounds forming, essentially, where the cities now dwell. And so you've basically got, cities are energy extraction machines built on mounds of the dead and mounds of decay. Similar, of course, to how oysters produce pearls, right? The pearls are produced from little dirt and decay, right, that is picked up by the oyster, and it's gestated and nurtured in this darkness of the mental cave of the oyster, and then, of course, it produces something that's gleaming, beautiful, almost unnaturally round and iridescent with colour.
Well, if I may, I think that if you remember the chariot cards that we looked at some episodes ago, that was representing a civilization that was entirely made up of false perceptions. It had a false canopy of stars. Everything about it was basically being pulled by organic forces represented by those two sphinxes, the white and the black, that were looking, at least to me, very miserable in their position. And I think that is like a depiction, because usually a picture, speaks 1,000 words. That's what is said, right? And that is the depiction of the city, the dead city, right? It is dead, not necessarily because of literal decay underneath. Of course it exists, but because they are not made up of organic life. They are made up of these encapsulated perceptions, almost self-sustaining. And when I say city, is not necessarily just one location, but a civilization per se. And now we see it almost worldwide, basically more or less the same civilization, with sharing the same canopy, right? The same encapsulation of like what I like to call it, a virtual reality that is perception based, right? And that is what makes it dead. It makes it dead not because it is actually not living in the sense of biological life, but because it is unable to see the world for what it is. It's unable to see the organic world. It has to impose upon it a perception that changes the coloring and the meaning of what is actually there. And so, of course, this is what judgment also, the organic one, also tries to achieve, is to remove those false perceptions so that you see the organic world for what it is, with the things that are comfortable and the things that are uncomfortable, right? And so I think that when scripted judgments upon society occur, which are parts of these blueprints and these scripts, and smaller scale cycles done for that purpose, to sort of vent a little bit, it tries to escape the judgment done upon each individual psyche. And what I mean by this is, it would be an internal judgment, like you judge you, I judge me, right? But it becomes an externalized thing, a judgment upon society, which could involve, a external court of law, for example. I would say, the first thing that comes to mind is the staging of the Nuremberg trials, for example, right? That was a judgment upon society. That was something that, there was one society perception up to that point, and after that point, it changed. It started a new smaller cycle within the smaller cycle within the smaller cycle, right? We're talking about scripts here and blueprints. So when the organic judgment occurs, and it's not necessarily, and this is important for me to say, it's not necessarily a collective thing, like, all at the same time will have this judgment upon their psyche. No, we all have our timing, because we are all individuals. We share collective things, but inside we are in different positions, in different contexts, and so on. And so what it tries to prevent is, if you synchronize these judgment moments, as all the other moments that we have seen previously in the other cards, if you synchronize these, you are able to make the individual move or turn their backs onto what would be their organic judgment in this case, and by externalizing, venting it a little bit onto the external, pretend or believe, create another layer of false memory where this judgment already occurred. And they continue on with their coffins and their dead, still waiting for the return of their egos or Christs or inner authority to sort them out. That's the way I see it, at least.
Yes, and there's something interesting as well about, you mentioned the dead city, and this you're totally correct. It's this idea that it's not necessarily a physical deathliness, but that it's something actually contained introspectively. And in fact, this even, it's a mechanism for explicating the reasoning behind this mound of the dead structure of all these cities. And like what you stated, eventually at this point now, we have reached this sort of grand civilizational pinnacle where the city has become the world city. We are now all global citizens, right? Citizen meaning denizens of the city. And so this is strange, because I remember when I was writing my first book, that Rise and Fall of Civilizations, and go analysing the symptoms of their decline, I noticed, like what you state about the false memory, and basically the false memory is this idea that you get lost in the, again, like the currents, right, we were talking about, the waves, you get lost in the layers of your own self-deception, right? And the self-deception itself is the nucleus of that self-deception or false memory, as you mentioned, is built by the city. The city itself is not just this grey concrete architecture, this brittle, hard commercial enterprise and force, but at its heart is this need to create almost a morphic field of false memory resonance. And so this is why right at the end of Civilizations you find, well, there's this one stat, for instance, where there's this stat that states 30 to 50% of people have no internal dialogue. There's really 50% plus of the population out there walking around with nothing going on in their head. They have no internal dialogue. So again, they don't have that talkative brain. There's no ideation or idea formation within their mind. So it's almost like they're detached. They become like what we're seeing in this sort of emaciated, grey or greyified or huskified complexion, which is the externalization of this sort of dead city addledness of, to the false memory. And some to mention as well is almost, you could describe it as this dead city as, a city of 1,000 windows, but a rarity of light. And essentially that, I think that's what we're living in. Sorry, man.
Yes, and no. It's like, putting it another way, what you just said quite correctly is, there was a point, and I'm talking individually, that even if, and not everyone did, but even if we knew it was false, we forgot it was false, and then we forgot that we forgot, right? So you start, you go on in a sort of cascade built upon these false memories, these false perceptions, these beliefs, these standards, we could call it, because that is one of the pillars of any city, is to have a standard for everything, right? A standard currency, a standard language, a standard this, a standard that, right? So we participate, we voluntarily or less so, it depends, but we enter into that standard. And even if at one point we knew, we tend to forget, and to forget we forgot. And it's sort of an inebriation that this collective offers to the individual. And it reminds me, of course, of that famous passage in The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, where he visits this planet of where there's this drunk man, and he's very baffled, and he says, well, what are you doing? I am drinking. Why are you drinking? I am drinking because I'm ashamed. No, I am drinking to forget. To forget what? To forget that I'm ashamed. Ashamed of what? Ashamed of drinking. Right? So it's basically I think the cycle that is perpetuated by this these false perceptions, this canopy, as I called it just previously, that is put, what would be called the veil, right? People usually talk about the veil as if it's this elevated spiritual thing or this ineffable. No, the veil is the fakery. You understand? It's the false perception, is to see something there that is not there and fail to see what is actually there. That is the veil, you understand? In my opinion, at least.
It's like what you stated in a comment on the hub, and I found it really interesting. And it's, again, you sort of voiced what I've sort of been, leading myself towards in terms of study and thinking. It's this idea that there is no cosmic trap. The cosmos itself is internal. The cosmos itself is a mental, it's a mental matter. So the cosmic entrapment is not a cosmic entrapment; it's a perceptual entrapment. And interestingly as well, taking this back to the judgment card, you see this. You were mentioning this. You almost. This meta level forgetfulness, right, or amnesia, and that itself almost links to something I came across recently called It's this concept called Rumsfeld space. Now, Rumsfeld.
There are known knowns and unknown unknowns. That's
exactly, yeah. So you're sort of locked in this quantum entanglement of things, right? And this is how civilizations work as well. And in fact, this is why you have the sort of language that's built into the system itself, which almost is a Freudian slip up to its nature and to the landscape it's creating. You have the World Wide Web. You have the idea of the internet, right? You're being interred in the net, right? Like what you're. Of course, they're emerging from the sarcophagi. That itself means sarcophagi is flesh eater. I think that's what it means in Greek, right? So
yes, and it's not an accident. Just a quick remark. It's not an accident that, of course, the same imagery of coming out of a sarcophagus was used, for example, in the Matrix movie. Right, it's not an accident. That was appealing exactly to this installed imagery, and even if the original intent of these drawings was organic, it is therefore being directed through that to a very different type of judgment, a very different type of awakening. Right? Sorry, just to interject with that.
And they seem to hijack a lot of this as well, because so, for example, right. You're mentioning we're emerging from the sort of darkness of our own cave, or the ignorance, right, of things, and of course they've now popularized coming out of the closet, which is almost a total inversion of this idea of coming out of the cave, of emerging from one's own ignorance, right? That again, it's what civilizations desire. They create not just false memories, but false identities. And as we've mentioned previously, the id-entity, the id entity, id is obviously that sort of lower level instinctual animalistic drive, is something that's very powerful. It's a very powerful tool. It's an extremely effective tool for civilizations to control that morphic field of I guess you could call it resonance, right, or idea formation, or the thought form that is the civilization that forms its foundation.
I completely agree with you. And now that we move towards digital ID, it will be even more reinforced, because, of course, the virtual ID, in the sense of this identity with something that isn't organic, was already there in place, one way or another. But of course, it will reinforce it further. It will make it let's say, a part of even sort of infiltrating that which could eventually be organic. Right? It will start to seep in and convince more and more those who would allow themselves to be convinced more and more that they are this placeholder for themselves, and others to, even if they see what is happening and if they see that this is not themselves, will have to, deal with being carried by the current towards it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There was something I was going to mention as well about the judgment card, and it's this idea that you see within. So you see the reflection, right, and it's quite interesting because one is vertically pointing and one is horizontally pointing. Now, before we get to that, even the placement of the female, she is looking at the entire family, because the female itself, as we've mentioned, is the seed, is the kernel of the family, and even that idea of the kernel is this notion of the seedling, the source, the structural memory of the meta system, right? That would be nature, or it would be the human soul, or it would be the divine, that which is not artificially made, or is a reversal established by man for his own power gain, right? But you notice as well, so the vertically pointing sarcophagus, the individuals there, the husband, the wife, and the offspring, the son, they are almost they're not necessarily again their reflection on the other side, which again the horizontally placed sarcophagi, they are more jubilant, they're more religious. They are worshipping the divine, as in though they are detached from it. Again, they're digital, right? The digitus, which is of course the referring to the separated digits of the hand. Again, the hand would be this unified whole, so the digital implies this hyper-individuation, this separation between things, right, within the hierarchy. And it's, again, the other one is more pantheistic, you could say. It's this idea that they've all come to a certain degree of understanding that they themselves contain the immanence of that of the god, right, of the mysterious stranger, or the mysterious strangeness of the potential, and they're more willing to utilize it rather than just simply in a detached and remote manner, worship it from afar and beseech it for materialistic
Yeah,
do you see what I'm saying?
I see perfectly, and I would say that, in general, and this is a generalization with all the dangers it implies when you make a generalization, but in general, I would say that those who tend to worship externally, so worship a placeholder for something that should be internal, tend to be those that, although they wish and long for the judgment, those that will perhaps have a harder time in that judgment, because they will have more coffins to deal with, perhaps a whole army of skeletons just waiting for the gates to be opened, even though those skeletons will surely be sorted out by the emergence of the mind authority. They will be scary, right? So I think that it's interesting that what you said, because those that usually externalize the most, I think, although they long a lot for the judgment day, and or that what is that concept? The not
rapture.
The reaping, the rapture. Exactly. That's what I mean. That's what I meant. Will be the ones that, when the organic one comes to pass, I wonder, right? I wonder how it will be, because the rejection is further down into the underworld. Wouldn't you say? I don't know if you agree with this.
Oh, absolutely. And another dimension to add to that is that those who are, desirous of the rapture, again, this sort of materialistic saving from the tribulation itself, right? Because again, these individuals are so detached from their own internal dialogue. They're ironically so detached from God, and they're so entranced by the dogma of the church, which again is entirely man-made, but they believe it's from God, because God to them is this sort of materialistic man in the clouds, which is of course has his intercessors as the church, the man and the man-made dogma, and it's almost as though they will never understand that all of these things are merely designed to inhibit their emergence of the will, or their emergence of the positive ego, and that the extraction machine that is civilization, that is all of these institutions, be them religious, even financial, any sort of cult hierarchical structure, it's designed to separate them from their own agency, from their own power, and to the noumenal, I guess you could say, and to ensure that they almost outsource their thinking, outsource their agency to this system. And then so they don't understand that all of the dogma itself is designed to keep them in this sort of Ouroboros structure, where they're chasing their own tail, where they are if you will, they're in a state of
samsara.
Yes, engagement. It's engagement farming.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So that's how, again, that's how the system maintains itself. It's this also underpins Lush in a more materialistic sense, right? In a more grounded sense. Engagement farming is exactly what, well, of course, social media, you can see it quite directly with social media now, but the civilization, all civilizations desire that engagement, because if they have no engagement, well, firstly, the stage performance has no audience, right? So therefore, it becomes like an empty, hollow thing.
We are actors. We are the opposite of people. We need an audience, right?
Exactly.
Like in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
A parasite needs a host. You know?
Yes, and this concept of rapture that I touched upon. This is not particular because it is not my intention to focus on Christianity, but it's of course the symbology on the tarot is, among other things, also touches upon Christianity, and it's the background of our cultural upbringing, at least yours and mine. But what is the difference, really, between rapture and, for example, New Age ascended masters or the like, right? There is no difference. Or even a Buddhist nirvana or nibbana, right? What is the difference? Of course, people will interject and say, yes, there is a difference. Yes, there are slight descriptive differences. But in the core of the concept is this idea to escape something physically. When I say physically is, okay, you don't need to incarnate again, right? For example, you don't need to be here anymore. You don't need to be subject to, like in the hub was being talked about, the escape from the matrix, right? So there is this thing to escape. When a rapture is an escape, to become an ascended master, to wish to become an ascended master is an escape. That is what motivates people. It is not, to truly be this being that is, in my opinion, unattainable, because it's not human. It's not supposed to. Because if we were to be that type of being, we would be born that type of being. I don't think that there is an evolution. What there is once, as soon as we are put into this world, we are put clothes that do not fit us, who we are. They're too small for us, okay, these clothes. And we spend the rest of our time, if we are truly seeking, removing those clothes. Not adding something, not working towards something, not perfecting or evolving towards something, but removing. It is done through negation. And even recently, and I encourage you to listen to Kazumbo. He has he's building a very interesting model about this, and he goes into the negation. How the negation is exactly the perceived. It is perceived as evolution because every time you drop a burden that didn't belong to you, you feel lighter. You feel like, oh, I'm better, right? No, you're not better. You're closer to who you were to begin with, right? And so the rapture, not only does it externalize this judgment, like, oh, if I've been a good boy, daddy will bring me to the nice kindergarten, right? In a way. And I'm sorry to be a bit...
Oh, it's not in a way. That's directly what they believe.
Just, a bit jovial about it, but it is, sort of like I see it. And not only it externalizes, it misses the point entirely. The point is, you are adding to the false clothes. You are adding to the smallness, to the representation of smallness, instead of being the greatness that originally, innately we are, So, I just wanted to drop that in. What is the difference really between rapture, ascended masters, or, all these things that promote this idea of not only evolution, but working towards and escaping something? Like if, oh, okay, so this reality is a soul trap. So a soul trap means a trap is to escape, right? If you escape the trap. Or it's a prison. A prison is to escape, right? Or it's a school. Well, you want to graduate from the school to get out of there, which is basically what people want to do when they're in school, right? So, all these concepts, whichever angle you look at them, always propose that you are stuck somewhere, and your intention should be to escape. And what I say is no, don't escape. Observe and see who you really are. And therefore, by knowing who you really are, you understand that the world is far more than the smallness presented in your perception, that you were sold and bought that perception.
Well, it's also the idea that I've been toying with recently. It's this notion of resistance through non-resistance, the law of reverse effort. And it's actually, funnily enough, this is probably what's spurring on, again, in a psychological sense, the detachment from our own internal dialogue, or the loss of it. And there was a psychologist that mentioned recently that essentially, because we're so affixed to these digital technological, I guess you'd call it doom scrolling, and the drip feed of content of basically what is now turning out to be slop or AI or brain rot content. He says essentially what you're doing is you're not allowing your mind to go into its default. He used a term, I forget it now, default state. And he said that's what occurs when you're quote quote bored, right? When you're bored, you end up sort of introspectively questioning, pondering. You build that internal dialogue. You build, like what you're saying, you build the actual self. And if you're
rediscover,
rediscover, exactly. So you rediscover that self. If you just keep putting on the fig leaf of digital, content, brain rot content, and you're constantly, perpetually running the hamster wheel, so to speak, then you can never take the time to just sort of embrace the silence of your own soul. And that itself it robs you. It robs you of yourself. Essentially, it robs humanity of its soul, which it's designed to do. And he mentioned as well, this is why you have individuals now, mental health is through the roof, and you have so much. Now, don't get me wrong, you already have this sort of I guess you could call it the pandemic of existential dread that is inherent to societies, because civilization itself isn't just a sickness, it is the source of all social sicknesses. But he said the digitalism is almost accelerating this existential dread because people are so engrossed 24/7, 365 on this digital drip-fed brain rot content, and they're not being able to access and to discover that those deeper dimensions of their own soul, of their own internal dialogue. They can't actually deal with, for example, if the internet was to go out tomorrow, the amount of people that would have these nervous breakdowns because they would have to face the silence of their own soul that they have been, essentially avoiding by placing their head in the sand for, God knows, how long. So they would be faced with that existential dread almost tenfold.
Yes, and you touched upon a very important point, which is, and I'll start this with a question. This point with a question, which is, all world stage ever throughout any of the cycles of society, imposed upon cycles like we've talked in other places. What are they built upon? What are world stages, blueprints, etc. built upon? Silas, do you have an idea?
Well, they're built on the engagement of people, but
absolutely, no, you're correct. It is built on marketing, and marketing is engagement management, right? So whether it's from the religion, I'm including everything in the world stage, like religion, politics, entertainment, everything everything in every corner that you see in a collectivized, homogenized society is marketing, because marketing places a product, creates a need, and sells the product, right? Sells the product for that created need. And of course, when this is done almost exponentially, right, it generates everything else, and it starts even, self-regulating. Of course, it's not self-regulating, but it could self-regulate up to a point where the consumers themselves will generate more needs for more things that they themselves can create to fulfill, and none of it is organic. None of it is necessary, is actual life, right? So absolutely, you've touched upon the point of engagement, which now in social media is blatant. But it had always been there in every single aspect of society and civilization as we've seen it.
And getting back to the rapture, and well, before I get to that, even the stage, it has a very interesting word. I mean, obviously, it's from the French, right? Literally the same word. It means a dwelling, but if you look at the Latin etymology of that. And this is something I had in the World Tarot card notes just there, I've stumbled across. The stage actually derived etymologically from the Latin word stare, or stare, which it's where we get our word stare from, right? If you're to stare at something. And that also links with the word story. And of course you have stories that are told in this sort of a raconteur manner, and then you have stories in buildings, which are the levels, the layer cake, which fundamentally reflect hierarchy. Funnily enough, the tower itself, you have the skyscrapers now, right? Which itself is almost like an implicit psychological declaration by the Western system, this Faustian system that is seeking to conquer the infinite by basically bringing it down to the finite, measurable level. Is that they can they're just scraping the shell of the world egg, and they will transcend it. They will break the glass ceiling. That's another thing you heard from the sort of the feminists, the second wave of feminism, third wave of feminism as well, right? To break the glass ceiling. And so this idea is that the buildings themselves of the stories and the level or levels, they reflect the hierarchy itself. But I think this actually gets to a deeper fundamental idea. Again, it's a grand Freudian slip of the system with the language that they use. They are almost implicitly stating and conveying to those who can see that the stories are essentially just the layers of false memory. Again, no status, no rank in society, no prestigious office. None of it is real. It's all it's all based in the imagination.
Absolutely.
And then tying that back to the rapture and the judgment, this is fundamentally the distinction that we see present in that sort of reflection of the card between the two families. The rapture is the external seizure. I mean, rapture quite literally means to snatch or seize, from the Latin raptus, right? Again, you're seized by an ecstatic joy. You're carried off by the force of that, engaging ecstatic joy, that trance. And then the judgment is almost the internal call to an awakening. It's something that's self-initiated. The rapture it's something that's born of the passive. It's something that's born of the involuntary. And those ideas are related to someone who is asleep, who is slumbering, who is in a dream, or who is in a nightmare that believes it's a dream. So
yes, that dream is it's added to by the stories people tell themselves. The stories that are that add to the stories now in terms of levels, as you were talking about, because in one way or another, most of us contribute continuously to those stories, to the building of that huge story that is directed, and then we participate as well. We add to those stories. We add details, at least, to those stories, if nothing else. So it is engagement, and of course, we are also writing it along, as long as you follow the directives. But you are writing along happily into that set of false memories, into that set of virtual perception, basically. So absolutely agreed, man.
There's an idea that I came across recently as well regarding it's this term called valences, right? So it's a valence is a very archaic term. It means something different in North American parlance, but just in general English, both British and American, it's this idea of a length of decorative drapery attached to the canopy or frame of a bed. You see them with these very old-fashioned style of medieval or Renaissance bed frames, right? Something, funnily, we don't have now, but it seems quite useful for, instead of blackout blinds, you have this sort of valance on four sides. But that itself relates to this notion of the society, right? And there was a term
of sleeping, yeah.
And of sleeping as well. And there was a term that I came across recently, two terms. So you have the Metatronic order, which is this idea that you're mentioning, and it's the notion of the unbound serpent, the unbound Ouroboros, that understands itself. It's completely fine with the silence of its own soul, if you will, right? It's entered a sort of metanoic state where it's realized the profundity of its relationship between itself and the divine, and that both are almost part of this pluripotent synchronicity. And then you have the Metatronic reverse. So that would be the canopy, the Metatronic order, right? And then the Metatronic reversal, which is this sort of corruption of the natural order of things, of the Metatronic order. And it's this notion of the Ouroboros, that it artificially perpetuates itself. It compresses complexity. We do that in our own world by, material scientific reductionism, right? To be simple about it. And we also do that by essentially denying humans the ownership and the access to their own soul by, as we've stated, this sort of digital technology. So this maintains this valence, like what you're saying, the slumber. It maintains the slumber within the comfortable bed, that everyone becomes almost a lotus eater, entrapped upon this island amidst the raging currents of something they don't quite understand, but they worship more out of fear rather than a curiosity to know, or to gain a theosis, a relationship with the divine. It's born out of a sort of a Moloch syndrome, which is that you fear it, you sacrifice to it, you destroy yourself, you destroy your offspring for its the perpetuation of this thing that you don't quite understand. Again, this is what civilizations are based on, as we've mentioned.
Yeah.
These engines of extraction and engagement.
Yep, absolutely. Well, man, I think the judgment is more or less covered, unless you have... Yes, more or less. So now we move to the 21st card, the 21st Major Arcana. And it's a card where I know you have a lot to say, the world. So please, take us off.
So in terms of the World Tarot card, essentially the World card is basically the crystallization of not just this transformation that we've seen throughout all of the cards, but essentially the implicit values of all of the cards themselves, archetypally speaking. So what we're seeing with the world is basically it is the promise, and not just the promise of the system, the meta system, meaning the sort of nature, the spirit, the divine, It's not just the promise of that, but it is the promise of the projected reflection of the divine, which is, of course, encapsulated in man. So the first thing to mention is that it's to do with time. It's this idea that really there is no escape. It's like what you're saying, there is no escape, right? Because the system itself isn't a prison, like what we're mentioning with Jacob's ladder. It's a message to you. You will only go round the hamster wheel if you believe that it is a wheel. If you believe, and of course you will only be a prisoner if you believe what you're within is a prison. So all of it is a perceptual reframing, right? Again, it's almost like a cosmic observer effect. The thing you're looking at, the field itself, the form, the figure of the divine will change based upon how you see it, which is, of course, how these tarot cards are as well, right? There's a multi-layer of meaning, and you can only access it if you have that perceptual key, or if you're clued into that perceptual key, right, to access the door, the threshold of that understanding of it. But so the idea of the time is, and time and cycles is, of course, inbuilt into this. We see the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, which are, of course, also known as the 4 royal stars of Persia. Beginning at the top left, we have man. This is the beginning and the end. It's the sort of dark winter of the grand civilizational ages, or you could know it as the processional year, or whatever cycle we want to look at, because all of these things are essentially mere subdivisions of the other. But it starts with Fomalhaut, which is in Pisces Austrinus, which is the southern fish. Moving to the right, we have the eagle or the scorpion, which is that of Scorpio, the constellation, which is, of course, the royal star in that is Antares. And then down to the bottom right, we have Leo, the lion. That is, of course, the royal star of Regulus. And to the left, we have Taurus, which is also the earth. And that is of Aldebaran. That is the royal star contained in there.
But so, just to be clear, the man there represents Aquarius, right?
It does represent Aquarius, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. But Aquarius isn't a constellation. The constellation that's used in its stead is Pisces Austrinus. I think it's probably Pisces Austrinus, again, the southern fish, because it's this idea that you see within, well, you see it in other religions and other mythologies, but it's most evident to our modern Western cultural framing or knowledge base, and that of the book of Matthew, where Jesus states, "I shall make you fishers of men." Essentially, the idea is that men are the beasts of the abyss, that they are locked into this sort of salt sea of misunderstanding and drunken ignorance. So they need, quote, quote, saving from themselves, right? Unfortunately, of course, a lot of Christians, I don't think, understand that Christ himself is a symbol for one's own self-initiated saving, if you will, or salvation. And like what you're saying, that is all perceptual. So yeah, this is essentially... in the Kabbalistic system, this is between each of these 4 royal stars, if I recall correctly, is approximately 6,000 years, right? It's the 6 steps between each one, and if you put them all together, you come near as damn it to the processional year, the processional cycle. So between again, this is just from Kabbalah, I'm not saying this is correct, but between each royal star, in a sort of timely sense, these 6,000 years, a historical epoch, a grand civilizational age will occur, and then you will have basically a wiping clean of the simulation. This wiping clean of the simulation is what Kabbalah calls the recreation of both heaven and earth. So this is like what we were seeing in the previous card, the divine judgment, right?
Yes.
And this itself is lorded over by the central divine feminine, which we see in this case is actually unclothed, and she is the promise. The promise is that, again, the valence, as we were saying, the drapery or the canopy, the veil, the sciatic Isis, the veiled Isis, which no man hath seen unclothed, right? Getting back to this notion of nakedness, getting rid of all of the fig leaves of false memory. And then it states as well, right at the bottom of that statue, that her fruits that she has borne is that of the sun. So it's basically that of the human soul. She has birthed it, she is the human soul. And so in this idea that she's unclothed, and she just has this drapery around her in a serpentine format, and of course it's either scarlet or purple. It's this notion that she is... essentially man can know of himself, can unveil that Isis through the reincarnation of his soul through a multiplicity of experiences, right? That he can come to know of himself as as the breath of God, of which he is. She also has the double-ended candles. Now that itself relates to the dualism inherent in the world, the mutually interdependent paradoxical states. Of course, each opposition is thereby defined by its contrast with its own opposition. So light is defined by its contrast with darkness, and so on and so forth. She's also, as well, she has the fiery red hair, which is something we saw in the Lover card. That itself relates to the primal fire of the soul. It's the yod, it's the essence, the divine spark of animation. And then, of course, we see as well the bindings between the upper and lower bindings, which are in the shape of an X. That is the Tav, the factor X, right? This is the supernatural element that binds all of matter together, all of temporality together, all of the cosmos together. And that's the notion of, again, those contrasting forces, like Pisces themselves, right? The illustration of Pisces is the constellation. One moves vertically, one moves horizontally. One is seeking the horizontal, which is freedom or the material, and one is seeking the limitations or the divine. And the sort of diametric pull of the two forces the knot or the bind to tighten, similar in this case. And also the garland round her, or this wreath, is the Leviathan. That is the idea of, again, in the quantum sense, with this illustration of Bloch's quantum sphere, that, again, similar to the thesis and antithesis, this sort of dialectical world that we inhabit, and this is, of course, as mentioned, represented by that double-ended candle, the mutually interdependent paradoxes, that the Maya, or the illusion that surrounds us, this perceptual field, right, this perceptual entrainment field or containment field, it is produced vis-a-vis the thesis and the antithesis, the two threads orbiting each other perpetually, and by them orbiting each other perpetually, they establish the storm of time, the non-linear nature, which is the true nature of time, the vortical spiral, the tower, if you will. We were mentioning that previously. So essentially what it's conveying is quite literally the structure of the cosmos as it is at least conveyed or relayed in the mystery religions, you know.
Well, like is my usual, I look at these cards more towards an individual internal sense than an external. And so I think that what is depicted here is, especially when we, take into account that the previous card was Judgment and all the journey up to here, is the realized, integrated, if you like, using a Jungian term, individuated psyche that has accomplished itself in that particular cycle, and of course will move to a new full cycle. This we're talking organically, a new journey of self-discovery. That potential has been discovered, has been realized, and now it's time to discover a new potential. And you see basically here a depiction, obviously, of the zodiacal wheel, and she is unlike just a simple sun. She is the realized, integrated, complete, naked innocence of the primordial, of what was before even the manifestation began, whatever that was. Because you see, okay, Aquarius, as you've said, and across Aquarius you see Leo, which are in the zodiacal wheel the opposites. And of course, if you count two signs, towards two signs next to it will be Taurus, which across from it is Scorpio, that is sometimes depicted as an eagle as well, right? So, and she is in between that cross. Of course, it's an X in this case, but it's nonetheless a cross. And she is in the center of that cross, fully realized, holding her own organic decisions, both the active and the passive in her hands, and thus the candles. So she is naked because she has no shame, because she does not have any false perception of herself. Everything about her is accepted and integrated into the whole of her being, right? So this card, of course, it's called the World, sure, but I interpret it as, the realized entirety of the psyche. So as if it's the internal world. The internal world becomes completely integrated, and that individual, after all this journey of, like I stated before, undressing clothes that were too small, becomes naked in all the greatness, in my opinion. Of course, there's that drape over there. I don't know if the drape has a further symbology other than, perhaps trying to be more prudent on the part of the artist, but it is for all intents and purposes, completely naked and unashamed. There is nothing there that conveys any type of hesitation or any type of doubt about who this being is. It is self-assured. It needs nothing more than to be nothing more than what it already is in that regard. And so it stands in between in the center of the zodiacal wheel, represented by these four signs that are opposite to each other, as if, because they are in a sense sort of there to pay homage, right, to this. It's almost as if she, of course, was the creator herself, right? As if in that psyche, she was the one that regulated, generated all of the archetypes that psyche went through, that psyche had in the several mental characters that went through the mind. So, in my perspective, intuitively, I tend to read it, and also when, like I said, we link it to the previous journey, to an internal depiction, symbolic depiction, more than an external one. The cosmos may or may not be ever known or possible to be known to us, but that inner cosmos is already enough in the sense of is already quite the discovery for us to have. And I think that this is what it realizes here.
Well, it's even that idea as well, like there's almost a synchronicity between the two. The universe itself as the is the workings of the soul of man, you know, and this notion of the world. The thing is only, I mean, of course, it's a homophone with WHIRLED. So the world is the world, the whirlwind, the toroid, which is, of course, what you see with time there. It's this the cyclical spiral of time. This also ties in with something I call super tautological recursion. I mean, it can also be called the law of lawful recursion, which is that there's like what we were stating, there's a structural memory built into the system itself, and after each self-reckoning of the system, again, destruction begetting renewal, it basically makes itself naked and prostrates its own soul in front of the mirror of itself, right? So as we were mentioning with the Judgment card, there's always a sort of horizontal motion, but never a vertical integration. But with the World card, like what you're saying, this is the promise. This is this vertical integration, ready for the next cycle. There's an ultimate fulfillment, a mastery of the phenomenal world, and in this sense, and because of this this harmonizing, with the harmonious rhythm of the cosmos, again, order and chaos in this sort of equilibric state perpetually, and we come to terms with that essentially, both internally and even perhaps externally as well, that we almost become one with the cosmic dance of the world. And again, it's that idea that the more I mentioned in my notes here, that the more that the dreamer attempts to fight the dream and resist the dream, again, this notion of we're in a Chinese finger trap, if you will, right? And the entire idea is not to necessarily break, you know, the great escape, if you will, right? Because there is no great escape. The world is us, and we are the we are the world.
We are the world.
Exactly. We are the children. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, the more, the dreamer, by seeking to violently awaken from the dream, only pulls himself further into it. So, you know, the idea is to become one with the dance of it all. And interestingly as well, so that, by the way, see, if you were to overlay, and this ties in with what you were saying, if you were to overlay the around that Leviathan, or that garland, right? By the way, the Leviathan, if you trace it back into its Hebrew etymology, it's made up of a compound of two Hebrew words, or two Semitic words in general, which means quite literally the wreath or the garland of the torturous one. And so funnily, I mean, it's green as well, because green is the colour of spiritual unripeness and, of course, the world in which we inhabit. But if you were to overlay the zodiacal wheel onto that, where of course you line it up with the four royal stars and their respective constellations, or zodiacal signs themselves, you find that she's actually staring, well, firstly, she's staring at man, she's staring at Aquarius, but actually she's staring exactly at Capricorn, and she's got her back, or her head turned away from Sagittarius. However, her body faces Libra and Virgo, where the two double candles meet up. So that would be the autumnal equinox. And she's got her body faced away from Pisces and Aries, which is the spring equinox. However, again, going down to her feet, she's in this sort of almost this motion, this walking motion, or she's moving, it appears, right? Her left foot touches Gemini exactly, and her right foot dips into Cancer exactly. So the idea is essentially is this notion that she's looking backwards, and she's attempting to move backwards as well, right? To run the hamster wheel, that what's called widdershins, which is counterclockwise. But in fact, by her moving counterclockwise, she's pushing the wheel clockwise. It's similar to, of course, how what hamsters do, right? This is why they're in the perpetual motion. They never get anywhere. It's similar, of course, as well. It's similar to the world. You keep following the horizon. Eventually, you'll just be met with more and more horizon. So it's
well, that is why she follows by going into the full again, right? So the idea is that right next to this 21st card, you go back to the zero of the full, right? So you start a new cycle, of course, with everything that you know about yourself, but it's a new individual discovery that begins, right? So you go into this state of the same, not the same, but a sort of innocence or a sort of not knowing that the full represents, right? So you know everything, and therefore you can unknow in the sense and become an individual, go into a new individual discovery, that the full represents. Go back into falling into the abyss, let's say, right?
Exactly.
As the full would picture, right?
Well, this is the distinction between, and really this underpins the Saturn-Moon matrix, and matrix, of course, comes from the Latin breeding mother, right? So it's this idea that the system is constantly pregnant with its own base blueprint, almost this meta blueprint that goes beyond all the artificial ones. Mm-hmm. And this, of course, helps or is the basis of the recursion of the system. But it's this idea before the new full journey or epoch starts, you have to have that understanding in humanity of the Capricorn, of the Capricornian essence, which is that you are both the heavenly goat, which the goat can climb any fatal slope, any vertical slope, can quote, quote, vertically integrate, and then you have the duality of the notion of the fish, right? Again, the sea goat of Capricorn. So again, you're dwelling in both states. And the people who can dwell in both states are usually the ones that come out of this grand civilizational epoch, right? It's the purified soul. But of course, as well, there's always that idea that there will be another cycle, because there's still a lower down part of her body, of herself, because she's this sort of tripartite entity, as we all are, body, mind, and spirit, that's contained in Cancer. Cancer, of course, the Babylonians knew that as the gateway to the underworld. So it's this sort of recursive loop, right? It's a tight feedback loop. It's the alchemical purification machine that's on a sort of perpetual spin cycle. And you'll notice as well, so she's attempting, I've wrote here, the soul's trajectory through material incarnation, the central figure, the dancing figure, or the walking figure, the motion figure. It's almost similar to the dance of Shiva as well. I've noticed. I didn't write that in my notes, but just thinking about it now. The dancing figure is the anima mundi, the world soul, identified with Sophia, or the divine feminine, and the constellation Cassiopeia. This is because Cassiopeia is at the center of all of these 4 royal stars. And by the way, if you were to draw intersecting lines between those 4 royal stars in the world tarot card, it points to her womb. It points to her womb. So it's this notion again of the world age, all of the various, as you said, 4 suns, 4 material suns, which of course represent the mutable elements of nature, and of course that entraps or entrains or contains the 5th immutable element of the spirit, hence the divine feminine, which is symbolized as that. It's just constantly recursively orbiting that, right? The womb of life.
I was just going to say, yes, the manifestation serves a purpose, and one of the traps is the idea of seeing it as a trap. because it's basically a rejection of the manifestation itself, right? It's a rejection of the theater of organic life, because there is a theater to organic life, but that theater, as you well said, it is a script that is organic, that should be playing out, I would say, in improvisation more than actual scripted, but nonetheless there is a sort of unexpected discovery type of theater, right? You discover as you go along, you discover as you move through it, and that discovery is of course individual. You discover who you are in the reflection of others, of course, in the context of the world, but who you are at the innermost, at the most pure, organic, essential self within you. So I think that this card, yes, depicts very well that realization, so that the completely integrated, like I've said before. And once it is done, that part will not per se be tarnished again. When I say tarnished, is it has been fully realized. It knows all about that particular individual potential. Now it's time for a new potential to be, to go through the same journey. It will not be the same potential all over again, but a new aspect of this almost infinitely aspected essence that we are, right?
Absolutely. That's also seen as well. You notice there's a distinction between that of, so we see that Aquarius or man and the eagle or Scorpio are facing each other, so they are of course higher than, they're above that of Leo, which is the sun, and Taurus, earth. They are facing the observer. This may be a bit of a tangent, but it should tie in with what you just mentioned there. That, so basically, man is the reflection of the divine, almost the mirror of the divine, and Scorpio or or Aquila, or just in general Antares, that which is against Aries, against the spring, against the stasis, against the order, against, if you will, life, right? Temporal life. So thus it's the potential, it's the abyss, it's these notions. And that is also seen at the end of Ophiuchus, right? The Ophiuchian cycle, which is that Ophiuchus stands on the head of Scorpio. The idea is that man has defeated death, because the wages of sin, or wages of missing the mark, amarto, I believe the Greek word is.
Amartia, yes.
Yeah, amartia. Is of course death, right? Again, if you continually miss the mark, you continually go on the perpetual spin cycle until you understand oneself, and you come to, you're at peace with the system. Again, you don't escape the system. I think that's, like what you're saying, that's the delineation. It must be stressed. The idea is that we are both the architect and occupant of our own structural abode, right? We have reflected in the world our own spirit, and again, as a means of perhaps understanding ourselves through our own self-reflection, or of course one could say that we are to perpetually, or as long as time continues, to wander our own world like the fool, or the madman, the lumat. Again, to understand oneself juxtaposed to this system, right? Because one cannot understand oneself within a vacuum, quite literally or even metaphorically. One has to understand oneself juxtaposed to a sort of divested, fragmentary panoply or landscape of one's own soul, right? So again, we have to sort of tranche up in a horizontal manner, hence the earth, our own soul, to understand each individual aspect and work through it. Again, like the Fool's Journey of the Tarot card, right? We're working through each self-contained idea of our own soul in this sense. So to get back to that idea, you have the higher aspect of the reflection, which is man and God, or the potential of the nothingness, the ein, and that of Aquila or the ego. They face each other. They face each other because man, the observer of this tarot card, can never truly understand it while in this terrestrial state. Again, it's a strangeness. Even man's own soul can't really be described in linguistic terms because, of course, language is a measure of a concept, and a concept that's
a
ineffable.
stand-in for,
Exactly. You can never really truly have a stand-in for something that's so complex. It can't be compressed. But however, we have the materialistic reflections of that in the sun and earth, or Leo and Taurus. Those things can be understood, hence why those two face the observer. So those are the sort of the materialistic reflections, I guess you could call it the materialistic placeholders, or the materialistic summations or synopses of those grander ideas which dwell in sort of an incomprehensible space, at least to us as perceptual beings. So there's that thing to mention as well. And so she's moving counterclockwise. Why? Well, the paradoxical motion of her moving counterclockwise, which is it's called Widdershins in magic. That is, we'll get into that, what that is. And she's seeking to move in a Widdershinic or anti-clockwise manner, but she's producing the paradoxical and inverted motion of the clockwise rotation of the zodiacal wheel, Diocil. So again, this is this notion of chaos, Widdershins, anti-clockwise, produces order, clockwise or Diocil. So the Widdershins effort is the mother's conscious desire, or the feminine's conscious desire, to undo the cycle and return home. The paradoxical result is that her struggle is the motive force that powers the great wheel clockwise. Her rebellion perpetually generates the system's trajectory. This is the fall of Sophia, or even the fall in the Garden of Eden, which was produced by Eve, or literally woman, and the linear flow of the present experienced by fragmented souls. And then we have this time duality. She is existent in aeon, which is the eternal simultaneous time, the pre-actualized framing of time. That powers the system of chronos, which is the sequential forward moving time. So again, the figure's body placement illustrates the soul's descent and the nature of its own confinement, or the nature of its own traversal and journeying. Entry and authority, Saturn. Her head is turned towards Capricorn, which is of course ruled by Saturn, the zenith of the spiritual realm and the gate through which the divine soul descends into matter on its grand 30-year cycle, right? This is the idea of the Saturn return. That is the architect and recursive source projecting the blueprint of the ages. The moon, which is of course Cancer, where her right foot is firmly planted, that is the nadir of the zodiac and the ancient Babylonian gateway to the underworld. The moon on its swift 30-day cycle, give or take, is the regulator of the mundane, bringing the projection into the chaotic, watery flow of the mundane reality. And this relates as well to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Do you remember that scene where they're in the sort of misty laundry room?
Yes.
That relates to the Splendor Solace, which is a sort of precursor or another way to project this tarot journey of the Fool. And I think it's either the 20th or 21st plate of the Splendor Solace. No, it might be the 20th plate, I think. It's called literally the woman's work. And what that is the Great Wash. And this is the alchemical stage of the whitening, referred to as woman's work in the Splendor Solace. The soul's life in the matrix is a laundry of the soul, just as the linen is washed and bleached. That's plate 21. This is in my notes of the Splendor Solace. It might have been plate 20, I forget now. This
20 is the child's play. I am checking it now.
Oh,
and
it must be 21
curiously
then.
has the Tower of Babel in the background.
Oh, interesting. Right. So the soul is subjected to the cycles of material existence to move from the initial black, decayed state of Negredo to the purified, receptive state of Albedo. So this relates to the harvest as well. The purification is not for nothing. It culminates in the harvesting of souls. This is the X of the Tav that you see at the bottom and the top of that binds everything together. Presided over by the goddess, the Virgo, the Isis, ensuring the soul, or in this case the widow's son, the Horus, the Filius Philosophorum, the child of the philosopher, is cleansed and ready for the final stage of reunion, or just simply the revivification and the renewal of the story of the fool once more. So again, this relates to super tautological recursion. What that means is that basically what survives is what is meant to return. So it's super tautology is that it's a super abundant truth. It's a super self-evident truth of the recursion of, which means this idea of the cycling back. But it's not just the cycling back. It's the idea that the feedback loop has its own overarching or meta identity, and that is the only thing that survives. That's the nakedness, essentially, that you're seeing represented there. So that's what I have upon that. It's relating to time, it's relating to the world. Again, it's relating to this mutually interdependent cosmic play between the world as something that's both external and internal to man, you know. So it's very interesting.
Yes, the entire journey that we've gone through in these episodes has an organic meaning, I think, that is more or less, obvious, that there will be an organic correspondence that is then, in one way or another, taken over by the marketing of the false canopy, right? The marketing of this shrunk perception, not only of ourselves, but, of course, by shrinking ourselves, we also shrink the world around us in terms of perception, right? The smaller we are, the smaller we see the world. And, of course, the mimicry that occurs in the world stage of these cycles becomes obvious when we look at the stage play going on, like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern actors, caused the involvement of these two characters that didn't even know exactly what they were doing before they bought the play, right? Before they paid for the actors to do their thing, which ultimately led to their demise. So, and in the end, of course, he says there must have been a time where we could have said no, which is the power word here, right? It's the again picking up on Kazumbo's wisdom. The negation is the vehicle for the wisdom and for the realization of the organic self. And I think that once we are able to see the mimicry done in the world stage, then we can begin at least to allow the organic to manifest itself within us, because we are not, I think, and this is again something that I touch upon and I emphasize, we are not necessarily synchronized. We are not necessarily all in the same point of this journey. We are not in the same point individually. We do not share necessarily. Some of us may be, but we do not share necessarily the same step of a journey. And what the world stage tries to do, and in perception terms accomplishes, is to synchronize everyone to the same step of that journey, because it is a false one. It's like reading a book, right? If you're all reading the book at the same time, or if, better said, if you're all in a cinema room, in a theater watching a movie, everyone in there will be synchronized to that movie. They will all be seeing the same scenes, and therefore be exposed internally to the same moment, let's say, moment by moment, but all synchronized in the same moment. And that is what we need to, in my opinion, disconnect ourselves from, but not a disconnection of turning our backs and pretending it's not there, like, those monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, right? Not like that, but by seeing and knowing that it is false, seeing and recognizing this is not, but I am, right? This tries to imitate something that organically I already have and I already know to be my path, right? Individually. And my path, in terms of, the stages that it goes through, does not necessarily need to be everyone else's. There is, in my opinion, no one size fits all. There shouldn't be. And we shouldn't, surely, we shouldn't be synchronized all to the same rhythm and all to the same song, let's say. And so like we've spoken before about the Tower of Babel, we see an increase of synchronization through polarization. It is a marketing technique as well. You polarize and then you unify. But I think that the idea is that we are all being synchronized, if we so accept it perceptually, to the same virtual reality. And here I'm not talking virtual reality as in the movie Matrix, a computer simulation, whatever. No, I'm talking about a perception-based virtual reality, where if it is accomplished, and remains to be seen, but if it is accomplished, we will entirely 100% be sharing the same perception of the world, and of existence and of everything that matters to us organically.
Well, this is also one of the reasons for the sort of doublespeak of multiculturalism, and it isn't necessarily to have a multicultural tapestry in society. It's actually to bring all of these, otherwise foreign elements into the Western society, because what is sought is to ensure that you can sort of infect them with the same, like what you're saying, synchronization or standardization, simplification of the human soul, or basically turning them into culturally and psychospiritually emaciated corpses. And again, this is what digitalism runs on, which is the loss, the intentional loss and trimming, pruning of human biodiversity, not just in terms of biological, not just in terms of biological or genetic biodiversity, but cultural biodiversity. I think that's the most important thing. So they don't want the human soul to be too expansive, thus too unpredictable, right? They want it to be very constrained, so thus the data that is produced by that new, envisioned and reconstructed, you could say satanic soul, meaning adversarial, is one that is completely predictable. It is sort of linked to a tight feedback loop, and the outputs themselves produce a far more controllable telos, far more controllable end state, and that's the idea. Of course, that'll never come to pass. These things end up destroying themselves. But another thing to mention is what we're seeing in terms of those 4 royal stars. from the vision of Ezekiel is essentially the cherubim. And the cherubim, funnily enough, link with they're called the four faces of God, but they actually derive from an Akkadian word, caribou, this cherubim, and it can mean the strong ones, funnily enough, and we'll get to that, but it can also mean, and as a verb, it can mean the one who prays or the one who intercedes. So, as we were mentioning, it's the one who intercedes in terms of the world ages and provides this sort of seasonal, I guess you could call it reacclimatization to the meta order of things, right? Because humans tend to get off they miss the mark quite substantially, and they go adrift from the path. So it's to keep them on this path, if you will. But funnily enough, in terms of the strong ones, this links with something that I wrote in terms of the law of lawful recursion. And it states that what survives does so not through strength. This is also the notion of the meekness, the meek shall inherit the earth, but through the structure that returns. So if it has that implicit structure within it, it shall return. It doesn't return through its strength, but it returns through its trueness. And so that the restoration of life is built upon that recurrence of those who observe the quote-quote law, right? Hence the judgment. One who says the law. And it mentions here, and I just want to read this. This is kind of lengthy, but I'll try and skim through it. Quote, this tetrad serves, and this is in reference to the cherubim, this tetrad serves as equilibrators by creating a stable nucleus from which the physical world comes forth into being. These four vicegerents of the elements under the presidency of Spirit, Gabriel, which is, of course, in this sense, the divine feminine, are synthesized in the formula of Yod He Shin. This is also the 21st letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Shin. It's also the name of the Lord. It's the same aspect of the Poseidon, or Lord of the world. The Trishular, the trident. It's also Shiva, Shiva's symbol. Funnily enough, as well, on the juggernaut, that comes from a Sanskrit word, Jagartha, which means Lord of the world, and it's also an appellation of Krishna, who is an avatar of Vishnu, or literally he who is the slumbering dreamer at the heart of all existence, right? That the world itself is sort of this grand cosmic dream by the involuntary dreamer of Vishnu, and his main avatar is that of Krishna, the Dark One. Anyway, Krishna would be this sort of Shin, right? But you have the Yod He Vahe, but then you have the Yehoshua, Yod He Shin Vahe. So it's this fifth element. This is what Jesus is, right? Or Krishna in this sense. It is the spirit revitalized, understanding its own, not necessarily dimensionality, but understanding its own essence. Yod, lion, niquaquam, vacuum, nowhere, a void. He, eagle, libertas evangelii, liberty of the gospel. Vo, man, die, intacta gloria, unsullied glory of God. And he, the feminine. Ox, legis jugum, yoke of the law. And in the midst of the four letters is the Shin, the letter of spirit, which formed from the Tetragrammaton, gives the divine name of Yehoshua. The pentagram represents the concentrated force of the spirit in the four elements, governed by the five letters of the name of the restorer, Yehoshua, and is not only attributed to the planet Mars, but also shows the cherubim and the wheel of the spirit. It's related to Mars or Aries. This is why, of course, Antares is in Aquila, and it's almost opposing. You can actually see the face of the eagle. It looks almost like it's challenging or even mischievous when it looks at the stern man who appears
it's Scorpio. For all intents and purposes, it has that Plutonic, right?
Exactly.
Energy, so, yeah, it's
exactly. Yeah, so it's facing that Martian quality. Also, it's contained in Aries, so it's of a higher quality, but it's the quality of the springtime, the springtide, the promise. Yes, continuing on, alternating with each other by rotation, as we've mentioned already. Beside them was the symbolic form of the spirit, symbolised by the wheel. I've actually missed that. Digressing, planet Mars, but also shows the cherubim and the wheel of spirit. The cherubim of Ezekiel have 4 faces, those of the lion, the bull, the man, and the eagle, alternating with each other by rotation. Besides them was the symbolic form of the spirit, symbolised by the wheel, as suggested by the 2 wings that covered their bodies and the 2 wings that stretched upwards to each other. This is also the idea that's contained in the double candle. The synthesis of the cherubim is found in the revolving cross, in the pentagram, and in the idea spirit dominating the 4 elements, the immutable dominating and even producing the mutable elements. The cherubim are winged celestial beings which, unlike the most conceptions of angels, are anthropomorphic or are zoomorphic. On the 32nd path between Malkuth and Yesod, this is the Sephirah, there's 32 paths in between, and the 33 comes from the hidden one of Da'at. The Zelator encounters these 4 cherubim who perform elemental purifications, this is the laundry idea, which aid in the alchemical transformation of the aspirant. In this ritual, the aspirant learns that the elemental spirits are invoked through the power and governance of the cherubim and their zodiacal symbols. They are given Hebrew names, but their appearance is primarily Egyptian. And I've only got another two paragraphs to go, and they're very short. Adam, Hebrew for man, cherub of the air, the one to the top left of Aquarius, stationed in the east. Oh, by the way, that's another thing that's I forgot to mention. Basically, like with a lot of these tarot cards, there's what you would know as a law of perspective. So as the observer, we are viewing this from an inverted terrestrial perspective. But in fact, what we're seeing to the west, or the left-hand side of us, that of Taurus, and above the Taurus, that of Aquarius or man, is actually flipped around. It's to the east. So Aquarius would be that of the east, Taurus that of the east, Leo that of the west, and of course Scorpio or Aquila that of the west as well. So the east is that of life, if you will, that of the promise of spring, and that to the west is that of the promise of decay, chaos, change, destruction. And the priest with the mask of Osiris spake and said, "Thou canst not pass the gate of the eastern heaven unless thou canst tell me my name," of which is replied, "Thou art Nut, goddess of the firmament of air. Thou art Hormaku, lord of the eastern sun." By the way, this is also repeated in Masonic lore, even in their greetings and all of this. Arya, Hebrew for lion, cherub of fire, stationed in the south, lion-headed Leo. The priest with the mask of the lion, the Leon Tessephaline, spake and said, Thou canst not pass the gate of the southern heaven unless thou canst tell me my name," of which is replied, "Thou art Ma, the lion, very powerful lord of fire. Thou art Ra, the sun in his strength. Nesher, Hebrew meaning eagle, cherub of water, stationed in the west, eagle-headed Scorpio." Quote, "This priest with the mask of the eagle spake and said, Thou canst not pass the gate of the western heaven, unless thou canst tell me my name," of which is replied, "Eka, mistress of Esur, ruler of water is thy name. Thou art Taum, the setting sun. Shor, Hebrew meaning bull, cherub of earth, stationed in the north." By the way, the north is seen in Kabbalah, Judaism just in general, as the evil cardinal direction. By evil, we mean that which is where the sort of martial energies and destruction are placed. And this is why, funnily enough, Baal, Moloch, Hadad, Marduk, and even, of course, Yahweh, they are all contained in the north. These storm and war deities are all contained in the north. They come from the north. They are those who are of war, and they're of course, derision or of negation as well. And it states here, stationed in the north, bull-headed Taurus, quote, "The priest with the mask of the Oss spake and said, Thou canst not pass the gate of the northern heaven unless thou canst tell me my name, of which is responded, Satem, in the abode of Shu. The bull of earth is thy name, thou art Kefra, the sun at night." So it's, again, what you're seeing here is everything is surrounding this notion of the solar cycle. So it's all solar. The eastern sun, the sun in his strength, the setting sun, the sun at night. So it's this notion that the sun is the soul, or the solar, the soul, S-O-L, S-O-U-L, being that of the divine feminine, man in his naked true self, and in the R, which of course is the Resh letter of the Hebrew alphabet, that is related to pictographically and in terms of hieroglyphics, its hieroglyphic root, that of the head. So the idea is that all of heaven, if you will, is contained in the head. It's not actually contained up in the sky. It's contained in man's mind. That's why when we speak of heaven, we do look up at the sky, but in fact what we're looking up at is the third eye, you know, if you will, the pineal gland, of course, this is why you have Pinocchio. Pinocchio, he wants to be a real boy, you know. Pinocchio means quite literally the pine cone, right? So it's this notion of the pineal gland, you know. He's
and he's the placeholder identity too, exactly. And he wants to be the organic one.
Bingo.
I would say, I mean, that was a remarkable exposition. I would say, just going back a little bit back to something you mentioned about the multiculturalism and so on and so forth. My comment there is, it should not be confused, and I know you don't, but just for the record, it should not be confused that this internationalism that we witness now is, although it is pitted seemingly in scripted terms as an opposition to nationalism, it is both sides of, you know, the same play. Because even if we look at a nation was a small world in scale. So the same thing that was done, or that is being done internationally, was done to form a nation. Right, and an obvious example is the United Kingdom, where you have the Scots, the Welsh, the Britons, the Irish, and so on. And from all of that, you standardize and amalgamate and make it, quote unquote, multicultural. But actually, what you do is you homogenize through a standard, through a sort of a mold, to make a nation. So that is a micro world, isn't it? A nation is a sort of micro Tower of Babel in that sense. And of course, once it expands, because of course for every expansion there will be an organic one, but also a scripted movement of contraction. Right? For everything that tries to expand, there has to be a counter force. And so now the nation, instead of expanding, it contracts. The idea of nation contracts as the international expands, right? When before, even to create, when you went, for example, from the tribe to the nation, or to the kingdom, if you prefer, whatever, it was doing the same thing. So the tribe contracted and the nation or the kingdom expanded. So it is all, you know, it came from the micro to the macro. But the movement is the same. The blueprint is the same. The application of stories and of concepts and of even the psychological movements is the same. And this has to be, in my opinion, observed, not to fall into the trap of choosing sides too readily. I wouldn't choose sides at all in that sense, but that is my perspective. But I say, at least in a cautionary manner, not too readily. Because just the fact that something seems to be opposing to another does not mean it's sort of not that idea of my enemies. What is it? The enemies of my enemies are my friends.
Exactly.
That is not the case. That is not the case, because they are not enemies. They are not enemies. They are playing a part in an entire theater play, in the same way. And again, I bring up that movie because it's a very fine metaphor. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the actors, even if they were in conflict while on stage, outside of it, they were all friends. They were all, buddies and partners in that profession. So don't confuse the script for what is organic. Sure, there is an organic contraction, there is an organic expansion. That is movement of breath that happens organically in it cannot and should not be avoided, and it is an individual thing more than anything. So we're not all synchronized, again, I repeat, but it is the world stage, the false scripted reality, the virtual perceived reality that we should be aware of in that regard. And the fact that right now we are at a time where the nation is contracting and the internation, you could call it that, is expanding, does not mean that one should pick either of the sides and observe from outside of it, from outside of the script. Be as to a play a spectator. That is a quote from a remarkable poem written by the Romanian poet Mihai Eminescu called Glosa. And it is a remarkable poem that I recommend to everyone. There is a reading of it in my YouTube. And that is one of the quotes there. Be as to a play a spectator, which implies that you know it is a play and that you know that you're spectating it, you're not participating.
So all of it's doublespeak. Of course, you have multiculturalism, which, as you stated, it shouldn't be conflated with essentially what is. Remember, cultures aren't static things. They should be. There's this constant inhalation, exhalation. There's displacement of populations, new populations, and it's a diverse cultural tapestry, right? And I use diverse, and just a generalized sense. Not, again, they've also weaponized this term.
Yes, absolutely.
So all of these terms are weaponized, and it's like what you're saying. The conservatives, who, by the way, as historical precedent goes, they usually lose in terms of, I guess you could call it, preserving the quote-quote culture, right? Because they don't understand this fundamental maxim that culture, like, again, is the reflection of our own internal, not just our internal biology, but our own internal psychology. And it's not static. We're in this constant flux state. We're constantly reinventing ourselves. We're constantly synthesizing new ideas. And this is the issue they mention about one way to stop multiculturalism, right? And by multiculturalism, what we mean is the almost systematic pitting, it's the systematic creation of foreign enclaves within what was previously, a unified, well, near as damn it unified idea structure of the, like what you're saying, the quote nation. However, these enclaves then, through media, which funnily enough, Medea is the Greek goddess of illusion. I'm sure there's, that's just a total quinky dink on that one when they chose that term. But what they're doing is they pit the imperial stock, if you will, the previous cultures against the new emergent or incoming cultures. Again, because it's far more expedient for a political system who wants to centralize all power unto themselves to have the formation of internalized enemies and internalized dialectical structures. And again, this is what this generates. It generates for them an abundancy of these potential fault lines to exacerbate and control. It's essentially the fractures between the steps. That's what you could that's where they derived their power, and that's how you could define the quote-quote multicultural societies. But then in the same breath, we have the creation of the opposition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the idea of integration. Now, how can you integrate these, if you will, incoming foreign cultures into a culture itself, the imperial culture, if you will, that itself is in this constant flux? It's not in stasis. But they want the conservatives, if you will, the nationalists, to believe that the nation is this sort of conservative, this static thing, right? It's this, it never changes because they need it, because that actually destroys any semblance of the culture. Because again, if you believe in the stasis of the culture, it becomes brittle. It
and
can't
this is
adapt.
why, Silas, this is why even the idea of paradise or of the Garden of Eden or any such is completely artificial.
The rapture.
Because that would represent a static state of bliss, right? And that is already a negation of the other half that belongs to you. The more you reject it, as much as you reject that other half, it will not disappear. It will not, simply, you cannot wish it away, right? There is no paradise, there is no Eden, there is no garden, or was, because there was never a need for it. It's completely artificial. All that we need organically is here already. Okay, and this can be almost seen as an immensely controversial statement, when it's the obvious. You understand? All we need is already here. There is no paradise or utopia or Eden or whatever it is that would cause this stasis, as you say, that would suddenly, okay, now everything is stopped in this state of eternal happiness, whatever happiness is, because I don't know if happiness for you is the same as for me, right? And we're talking organic individuality, not, perceptions of mental characters. We're talking organically. Is happiness for you the same as for me? Maybe not. Maybe it is. Maybe we share it. Maybe we don't, right? But there is no stasis, ever. Stasis, yes, there is stasis in death, and even so you decompose, right? So there is nothing like that. And all that we need for this journey, and whatever, even if we are completely wrong in everything we've ever stated all over this series, in these episodes, about what we read in this journey and so on and so forth, even if we're entirely wrong and there's not one bit that we got it right, regardless of that, all we need is already here. It's all here. We just need to look at it and stop perceiving something different. Stop externalizing judgment, for example, right? And by externalizing judgment, I am saying, you judge something upon what something else, someone else, or a collective judges it upon, right? We must, because that is what we are, what we must do is, in our perception, we should cleanse the filter, not cleanse the filter, but actually awaken the filter again, because it's always been there, waiting patiently for us to call upon it, right? And there's this identification with, oh, I'm Portuguese, I'm Scottish, I'm whatever, American, I'm all these things are part of that placeholder identity that has nothing to do with who we are organically. Mm-hmm. That is why I've just stated that, the nation did the same to the individual that the internationalism is doing to the nation. It's just a different scale. What is the difference between, okay, it reminds me of that, you remember the Monty Python and Holy Grail?
Oh, yeah.
Where King Arthur arrives at that village, and he says, "I am king of all the Britons," and he says, "Who are the Britons?" "You are. We are all Britons." And he says,
Exactly, yeah.
of course, then he goes on. Yeah, then he goes on a rant about anarcho-syndicalism and so on, but that's beside the point. The idea is, so someone comes in and says, "Well, I'm your king, right? Now I unify all these lands." So what is the difference between that and more so, now I bring my the people that I bring with me, and they will live among you and change your culture, right? And so that you unify this culture of whatever Britain would be, right? Or Portugal or whatever it is. So what is the difference? There was no difference. No difference. The movement is the same.
Mm-hmm. In a way, harkening back to that theme of nakedness, that once we see through these dialectics, and once we even see through the false memories, as you're stating, of even... it really starts with the tribe, doesn't it? Or the clan, which itself is sort of this artificial degradation of the idea of the family, which is something that is bonded by blood. That is something that is apparent. It's even, of course, it depends upon how functional the family is, or dysfunctional for that matter. But there's a bond of blood there which is very powerful. However, it's not quite as powerful in the tribe, and it loses more of its, I guess you would say, vivacity or inborn natural power when it gets to the societal state, then that of the national state, as you stated, and then the international, and each layer is almost a descent, a vertical descent. In terms of naturalness, right? It's a Metatronic reversal. It takes the order, completely inverts it. So in that sense, really what you're seeing is the reason civilized, quote quote, civilized people need the idea of salvation, right? And for example, for the right-wing nationalists, salvation would be the ethno-state. For the left-wing national, they are a nationalist to a degree, you could argue, but the left-wing multiculturalist, their idea of salvation is this sort of sustainable utopia where we have skyscrapers that have, the abundance of green roofs and everything is, in harmony. And you basically have harmonized nature with grey digital concrete, right? So those are soteriological visions of the future. You said the same thing in terms of Eden, right? Or paradise, reversing the fall. Kabbalah even has this idea, the eschatology. Civilized people need eschatologies. They need this soteriological fuel to get them through the day, because the only way civilizations work is by implementing ritualized ordeal structures. For example, I'm in university right now. That is a ritual of ordeal. It is, and it's designed to, they hope it breaks you down through these repetitive, absolutely meaningless tasks. This sort of intellectual, cognitive busy work, which, again, similar to what you see in the workplace and civilization with their fake economy, it's to keep you running round the hamster wheel.
Dig holes and fill them back up. And then dig again.
Yeah, diggy hole, Why are you digging a hole? I'm a dwarf, that's what we do. So, it's that idea, you believe you're going one way, and in fact, you're producing the opposite sort of impetus or motion within the system. Again, you believe you're working to buy your own freedom, when in fact, you're just simply tightening the noose that sits around your neck. So it's that idea, right? It's basically civilizations are work on judo momentum, or the inverse of momentum. So yeah, the civilized people need that. They need this idea that there is paradise at the end of the tunnel, because fundamentally they've been brought into a state of learned helplessness, And because civilization runs on fear, let's be honest, right? It's again the enemy. It's the fear of the enemy. The enemy can be unseen. In fact, it's probably better if the enemy is unseen, because you can just, big them up. The ultimate example of that was the Corona event. Oh my God, you can't see it. And essentially,
and you can also, by being unseen, you can also attribute to it powers that it does not necessarily have, which is also something we see with these elites. Oh, the elites have this and have that, right? So continue, sorry.
Absolutely, and it's no different than Sumerian demonic possession, where the priests would attribute just whimsically. One age they would say, I don't know, Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, the queen of the night, was associated with miscarriage, and then the other, a few generations later, they'd say, no, well, she is, she presides over miscarriage and abortion, but she also presides over that of, I don't know, arson or fire or something like that, So they big them up. They create basically fictitious monsters, similar to the etymology of monsters, because it's a reminder.
Boogeyman. Yeah.
The boogeyman, yeah, because it's a reminder to the pawns on the chessboard that they have no agency, right? Because if the pawns believe that they have agency, if the pawns stand up, the entire chessboard goes, the entire game goes, the entire rigged game goes. The basis of power is contingent upon the pawn believing that it has no power,
Yes.
And that's essentially what you're seeing in the system, and it's what you see in all civilizations.
And I should make clear, perhaps, I don't know, as a closing statement, I don't know if there's more to be said about the world, because we went on tangents, but regardless, it's good. Just to make it clear, I am not saying with my statement that we should not relate at all and that each individual is an island. What I am stating is, for a relationship to exist, for me to talk to Silas and Silas talk to me organically, we have to know first that we both are individuals, and we have to know how to respect the individuality of the other. And do not not try to either absorb or convert or whatever it is, any action that would decompose or that would remove that individuality, because again, his path and my path are different, and the same should happen organically with any relationship. And this is what, first the tribe, then the nation, then etc., globalism, whatever you want to call it, does, is that it uniforms that which should be different, that should be individual, right? And when people usually use the sentence or the phrase greater good, there could never be a greater good. There can never be a greater good that does not take into account all of its individuals. So there is, of course, no greater good. And that is a concept as artificial as paradise, as Eden, whatever. So just to make it clear that I am not stating, of course, and I know that you know this, but for the record, that we should all be islands and completely individual and completely self-sufficient. That is not the organic structure of ourselves. But when we relate, we should all bear in mind and have a perfect notion that we are individuals. And that is the crux of the matter here, because it is a fact that it is the attack on the individuality that promotes the virtual reality, because then we get synchronized, like I said previously. So that would be my closing statements, at least. Now I'll allow yours.
Well, I agree totally. Something just to harken back to the idea that we were touching upon with this goes beyond multiculturalism, but the idea that you just stated there is that we almost find a synergy. It's not about integrating our viewpoints, because fundamentally we disagree on we agree on many points, but we will disagree on other issues. It's not about integrating the disagreement, it's about finding a synergy of ideas. It's essentially, we can only know the world from our own point of view, and if we can draw inspiration, which is the synergy from each other. It's similar to, of course, how most successful multiculturalism works, right? You don't integrate the incomer, you find a synergy between your culture and theirs. The Romans were absolute masters at this, they didn't have hubris, well, at least not for the majority of their existence. They saw in the foreigner, if you will, don't get me wrong, they had the terms barbarian and things such as that, right, which dehumanized the foreigner, but they had this idea that if the foreigner had an idea that was, superb, that they find a synergy between their system and this grand new idea. And it really, it's the same thing within any constructive, positive system. That is what occurs. But the problem is, that is something that provides agency to the individual, and it doesn't provide power or the centralization of power to the control structure. The control structure has to establish this memoryless state within the individual that all that exists is now, and completely affix your gaze to the pyramidal bastion of the hierarchy, right? In fact, externalize the hierarchy by your beliefs and your unburdening of memory and your own history and of course your own agency.
Yes, so and just to remark that you're not saying that Rome did that organically. They did that with subterfuge to gain an empire, supposedly. But what you're saying is that they tried to mimic an organic response, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So it's that idea that essentially fractures are not necessarily bad, divisions are not bad, differences are not bad. In fact, I wrote here in my notes, consciousness is composed of discrete steps, and the soul lives in the fracture between those steps. So the discontinuity where the next probable move is decided. So it's the idea that it's between the sort of the crevices of that fracture that the true treasure lies, and it's not necessarily shying away from difference, but in fact, embracing it to a degree, embracing it as its own discrete, self-contained inspiration.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very well, man. Well, it's been quite a joyful journey. I'm sure, although this series, at least on the Major Arcana, comes to a closure, I'm sure that we'll continue to have other types of discussions. But in terms of what was the Major Arcana, as seen at least from the symbology of the Rider-Waite, what it transmits to us, this was the final episode. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And this series was really a joyful journey as we went in analysis and, in my case, focusing my intuition onto these symbols was very, very joyful, and to share with you as well. So I appreciate and thank you for participating in this and making this possible. Thank you.
Oh, well, I completely I would reiterate your sentiments as well, and I feel the same. And it's almost like we're at the end of Shawshank Redemption. We are the Andy Dufresne of this esoteric journey. And funnily enough, on YouTube, this will be part of a playlist. So this isn't the final step. Remember, the Fool's Journey is continuous. So if you press the loop button, this journey will begin again.
Yes, that's right. That's true. That's correct. Yes. Okay, so thank you everyone for listening to this episode and to all the others. And although not in this series, I hope to see you again in some other conversation, some other topic. Thank you.